Good morning, everyone. How are you? This is Enrique of Spanish United. Thank you for everyone for tuning into the show. Today, we have a very special guest, and I would like you to introduce yourself to the audience, please.
My name is Mark Potok. I worked for quite a long time, 20 years at the Southern Poverty Law Center. I headed our Klan Watch project, later known as the Intelligence Project, and basically have dealt with all kinds of aspects of the radical right and of hatred, ethnic, religious, and so on, hatred in the United States and elsewhere.
Perfect. Thank you for coming on the show.
My pleasure.
Yes, as we spoke in the email, Spanish United is it's a fairly new organization. I founded it in 2020 with, when the death of Andres Guerrero, who was a Salvadorian American teenager that was killed by the police here in Gardena, California. It sparked my concern about the rise of extreme Hispanophobia. I'm not sure if the Southern Poverty Law Center's ever addressed it or spoke about it, but it is a very new phenomenon in the terms of the term. And one of the things that we do is that we educate people on Hispanophobia, discuss about it, and then we encourage people who are victims of it to expose it, because Hispanics are the only ethnicity in the United States, as far as I know, that don't have the same protections when it comes to certain groups like the African American community, Jewish community, LGBT community, etc. And since Hispanics are not considered a race, they're considered an ethnicity, sometimes it's kind of hard to keep data of what happens towards Hispanic people. And then many Hispanic people don't report hate crimes committed against them because in many cases of their status of being undocumented. So that's one of the things that we do, is try to expose it, at the same time promote tolerance and workshops, and to project a better image of the Hispanic community towards the outside world.
Let me interrupt you just for a moment,
Sure.
if I could,
Sure.
simply to say that it's not quite true that Hispanics or Latinos aren't protected by hate crime laws. It really doesn't matter whether you're considered an ethnicity or a race. If you are attacked in some kind of criminal attack for the reason that you are quote unquote Hispanic, quote unquote Mexican, quote unquote brown, you are certainly liable to be punished by hate crime laws. And one thing that backs up what I'm saying is the fact that, in fact, the FBI records and counts anti-Latino hate crimes. It's certainly true that many people don't report these crimes, and that the numbers reported by the FBI officially are undoubtedly low. But you can learn something from those statistics. And just to jump ahead for a moment, one interesting aspect of anti-Latino hate crime in the United States is that, in fact, it went up dramatically during the Trump years.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, Donald Trump is a man who started his campaign, his very first speech, by essentially describing all Mexicans as drug smugglers and rapists.
Right, correct.
And went on from there. So, I will tell you that between 2014, in other words, the last year before Trump started campaigning with his directing all this vitriol towards Hispanic, until 2019, the last year he was in office, the last full year he was in office, we saw hate crimes, well, actually the last year for which we have statistics, we saw anti-Latino hate crimes go up 76%. And that is a higher jump in hate crimes than in any other category. Just to give you a sense, anti-Jewish hate crimes went up 56%, anti-LGBTQ hate crimes went up 25%, anti-Black hate crimes went up 19%, and perhaps most surprising of all, anti-Muslim hate crimes went up only 14%. So Latinos as a group really took it on the chin, in a sense. They were the most attacked group outside, I would say, of transgender Americans in this country.
And would you say the reason why Hispanics are targeted, is it the fact that a lot of people don't see them as citizens, they see them as foreigners, or is it because it's an easy target to target because of the rhetoric of the far right?
Well, I mean, let me go back to something you said in the introduction that there's
Mhm.
this new huge swell of anti Hispanic, vitriol and violence and so
Hispanophobia.
on. And I don't think that's exactly true. I think the reality is that, of course, to some extent, there's anti-Hispanic, anti-Latino hatred in this country going back to the very beginning, and of course, since the Treaty of Hidalgo, Guadalupe Hidalgo, and so on. The history of the Texas Rangers in Texas and all of that. But to speak more of the sort of modern era, in fact, there has been an array of organizations, in particular, the Federation for American Immigration Reform, formed in 1979, the Center for Immigration Studies, and Numbers USA. These are three organizations that were created by an infamous Michigan ophthalmologist by the name of John Tanton. And these institutions are very largely responsible for the generation of enormous amounts of propaganda that is essentially anti-Latino propaganda. They don't like immigrants of any kind,
Mhm.
this network, but they've done an enormous amount of damage. And in fact, this network of organizations was responsible for destroying comprehensive immigration reform in 2007, and then once again in 2014. So I'm suggesting that this has been a long building thing, that there are really nasty people out there
Mhm.
who promote this as a matter of ideology and profession.
Mhm.
Many of these people are paid jobs to create, an enormous variety of conspiracy
Mhm.
theories about Latinos, about Mexicans, about Hispanics in general outside of the country. And we can talk about that anyway. I
Right.
interrupted a long
No,
time
it's
ago. I
fine. It's fine.
apologize.
It's my pleasure. But yeah, like I said, one of my concerns that I've been seeing in the last couple of years is primarily since Trump came and went, is the fact that anti-Hispanic sentiment has grown, Hispanophobia has grown, but unlike other groups of people, like I said, it tends to be invisible. It tends to be unreported. And there was a case that I've been following for the last couple of days where a woman in St. Louis, Missouri, was harassing a Hispanic family, Mexican family in St. Louis in their home, and that broken into their homes about 7 times and even threatened them with a hammer. And the thing that really bothered me was that the woman was apprehended and she was arrested, but the prosecuting office is refusing to charge the woman for a hate crime, and one of the daughters from that family, of the victim's family, was saying that they want this woman to be charged because they were particularly targeted because of their ethnicity. And one of the things that we do in Spanish United is that when we see that a particular prosecutor, or let's say a group of law lawmakers, refuse to go after people specifically, that they don't want to prosecute them for a hate crime, this is where I come in, because it's like, I just feel that it's not right that, for example, you have other groups of people that get prosecuted for doing something against the groups of people, but for some reason when it comes to Hispanic people they tend to be ignored. That's one example. Another example would be is what's happening right now in the state of Florida and the state of Texas, where you have the two governors by the name of Abbott and DeSantis that are, in my opinion, they're committing human rights abuses towards the Hispanic population of those states. They basically become like the modern day Gestapo in those states.
That's true. I wouldn't say that they're, obnoxious policy pronouncements and laws and so on are limited to Latinos. Of course, they're also very busy attacking Muslims, attacking Black people, attacking, Black history and so on. But yes, that's absolutely true.
And I feel that the reason why these two governors in particulars are getting away with it, because they feel that Hispanics don't have the power to say something about it, and that's the reason why they feel that they're able to get away with it. And this is a concern that I have, that Hispanics are the largest demographic in this country. Hispanics outnumber African Americans now for the first time in the country's history. And the next couple of decades, there will be a non-white majority in the country. But I feel, and this is my personal opinion, if Hispanic people don't have the same levels of the standard of living as everybody else, it could create social unrest or instability in the next couple of decades, you know. And I feel that the only way this could be prevented is that Hispanics need to be more integrated when it comes to economics and to politics. And one of the things that we encourage in Spanish United is to encourage Hispanics to vote. You know, we don't encourage any particular party, but, you know, to be involved and to be involved in their communities, because that's the only way they're going to be heard and not be isolated.
Well, I mean, I certainly think that's true. I mean, I think that, you know, sort of integrating into white-dominated society isn't the only answer. I think that, you know, it would be useful to have stronger Hispanic organizations. I mean, you know, certain organizations like LULAC, you know, they've done some good, but they're, you know, moderate to the point of being weak. So, you know, and I just think that it would behoove Latinos in this country and other people as well to understand how much of a campaign has been carried out against Hispanics in this country in terms of propaganda and so on. You know, it's not merely, and I wouldn't agree that, you know, we shouldn't pay attention to the parties because, you know, the vast majority of anti-Latino propaganda and vitriol is coming out of the Republican Party. There's just no denying it.
Correct.
And, you know, it is certainly true that there is often a reluctance, as you said a while ago, to prosecute hate crimes correctly directed against Latinos. Probably the most infamous case was in 2008 in Shenandoah, Pennsylvania. Perhaps you've heard of this, but a Venezuelan man walking down the street was attacked and beaten and stabbed to death by 4 white high school players in that town. It's kind of a rough town that has a history of immigrants of all kinds, but more recently has been dominated by Hispanic and really Mexican immigrants largely. In any case, what happened there was it was an obvious hate crime. There were things that were said by the perpetrators that made that perfectly clear in terms of evidence. And yet there was extreme reluctance to charge those white high school football players who were kind of stars in the white community. What ultimately happened is that 2 of them were convicted of misdemeanor assault, and that is all. There were also allegations, and in fact, the Department of Justice came in and charged 3 out of the 5 police officers in that small department, that small town's Department of Police, with a conspiracy to cover up the crime and to protect the 4 white perpetrators. And in fact, ultimately, some of those police officers, well, in fact, they were acquitted by a local all-white jury. Anyway, it was just a terrible story, you know, in which a very clear hate crime carried out by people who were well known in the white community was essentially covered up and let go by the boards, and, you know, nobody wanted to hear about it. Let me say something else, just in terms of talking about politicians and other community leaders who amp up this anti-Latino hate crime, hatred, vitriol that we're talking about. I did a lot of work in Suffolk County, New York, which is on Long Island outside of New York City, where the infamous 2008 murder, again by young white men, of a man named Marcelo Lucero, you know, created a wild storm, just a firestorm there. I went up there and did a lot of work around that hate crime, and actually was the author of a very big report looking at Suffolk County. And what we found, I was at the Southern Poverty Law Center at the time, what we found was, first of all, the level of petty and not so petty hate crime directed at Latinos in Suffolk County was unbelievable. And a tiny percentage of it was being reported, 1%, 2%, 3% maybe. One of the other really remarkable things about it was that it turned out that in the days and weeks and months and really years leading up to the Marcelo Lucero murder, local politicians in Suffolk County had said some absolutely incredible things, been quoted in the papers talking about, if a bunch of Latino men came to my community, I'd be on the corner with a baseball bat, said one of them. It was a county commissioner. Another one of them said, I'd be out there with a shotgun if they came to my block. The county leader, guy named Steve Levy, very much kind of amped up this idea when anti-hate groups like the Southern Poverty Law Center came in to kind of point this out to the general public. We were described by Levy as anarchists and communists. So, that's merely one example, but you can see that in very many places around this country, certainly not at all limited to the South or the Southwest or border states, anti-Latino hatred is alive and very well.
Yes.
I would also point out that a lot of this hatred is amped up by conspiracy theories. There is a theory out there, it's been out there for good, 12, 13, 14 years now, that, Mexicans and Chicanos and American-born Hispanics secretly have a plan in concert called the Plan d'Aztlán, right? And this secret plan is to invade and reconquer the 7 southwestern states of the United States, take them back to Mexico. It's utterly absurd. There's zero basis for it. But this is repeated by politicians regularly, by people like Lou Dobbs, who for many years was on CNN with a daily show.
I remember Lou Dobbs
about immigrants bringing leprosy plagues to the United States and so on. There's a related conspiracy theory, which is even more current, the so-called North American Union theory, the NAU theory, which posits that since 2005, the leaders of Mexico, the United States, and Canada have been secretly planning the merger of the 3 countries. And there's all kind of stuff that goes with that. Soon we're all going to have to be spending the Amero instead of the dollar because we'll be part of this sort of federation of globalists. They're going to drive a NAFTA highway right through the middle of all 3 countries. And it goes on and on and on from there. So, although these theories sound, like somebody's been smoking wacky tobacco, we live in an era where a congresswoman, Marjorie Taylor Greene, can talk about Jewish space lasers starting, wildfires in California. So I guess it's not that surprising.
Right. And one thing about the far right is that today,
lack for wild imagination.
Yes, they have an imagination that, even boggles my mind. It's like, I can understand people having conservative values and opinions, that's fine. But when it gets to the bizarre, it's like, I start to question people's sanity, because it's like, a lot of the far right believes that the liberals and the Democrats are in charge of a satanic pedophile ring, and it's up to Trump as the Messiah to cleanse the world of the supposed cabal. To me, I find that to be bizarre that in the 21st century there are people that believe in that hogwash.
Yeah, I mean, look, that QAnon theory obviously is conceived and believed by lunatics. That said, there are more sort of remotely plausible claims, equally false, but that are believed by tens of millions of Americans. I mean, listen to what the Republican Party, or large sections of the Republican Party, are saying right now. That what the Democrats are doing, are purposely bringing, crisis at the border, quote unquote. Democrats are bringing in as many Mexicans and other Latinos as they possibly can, because they know these will be subservient voters that will do exactly as they like and vote for Democrats and big giveaway social programs and so on. The idea is that Democrats are importing people who they think will be more Democrats. in the country, and so Republicans and conservatism in this country will be wiped out.
Right.
And, among many other obvious things to say about that is, Latinos in this country are hardly uniformly liberal or democratic. It's just not so, right?
Right.
And so it's ludicrous on many levels. But the point is that enormous numbers of people believe these conspiracy theories. And they also believe, lunatic claims like Trump's, that Mexicans are a bunch of rapists and drug dealers. Period. That's who they are.
Yes, and like one of the things like I've done here in the West Coast is like, for example, like when there's been cases of Hispanophobia, like there was a case, I think it was like 2 years ago. This was actually came on the news that there was some fruit vendors that were selling fruit somewhere in the San Fernando Valley, and these two owners of a bar, which the fruit vendors were nowhere near the bar, decided to just come up to them and harass them. And it was like appalling. So what I did is that I led a boycott of that bar, of that grill or whatever, and it was eventually shut down, because I don't think an owner of an establishment should be in business, especially if they're going to be harassing people that are not harassing their business in any way, shape, or form. To me it was utter prejudice. And then there was other cases where there were incidents where Hispanic people were having their carts turned over, and a lot of these crimes were being committed by Black people in this particular case. So I also led a protest where that there needs to be protection of these vendors, because a lot of these people that are doing these things, that's their livelihood. And I'm also very involved in the homeless community. Me and my mother, for example, we go out into the field and we bring a lot of food, medicine, and water to a lot of people that have fallen through the cracks, because California, there, as there was a homeless crisis, and many of the people that are being affected are Hispanic people. So we do what we can to try to reach out to a lot of these people that a lot of them don't even have access to many services, because a lot of them don't speak English. Many of them are afraid to reach out, depending on their status. So it is a very chronic issue that the Hispanic community is facing at large.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, let me make a couple of points off some things you said. One, as far as Black hatred of Hispanics, Hispanophobia, whatever you want to call it, I just think it bears saying that no group is immune from these kinds of ethnic hatreds, right? I mean, there, for instance, there's a tiny little group called La Voz de Aztlán, that is why it's a Latino, very small website, used to exist. It's wildly anti-Semitic. They're into the protocols of the Elders of Zion and so on. So my only point is that these kinds of hatreds certainly do not only come from white people, although much of the conspiracy theorizing and the kind of demonizing you hear on national television and other venues does come from white politicians.
Right.
I make one other point, which is that what you've described as terrible stuff, but at the same time, I'd like to remind people that there's a lot worse going on out there. I mean, a few years ago, there was a neo-Nazi out of a group called the National Socialist Movement, meaning the Nazi movement, who was constructing bombs and other explosives with the hope of giving them to groups like the Minutemen to mine migrant trails across the border in Texas and Arizona. So that's the kind of thing that's fairly common out there. Let's not forget the Minuteman movement, right? We had hundreds and hundreds of these tiny little groups doing quote unquote civilian border patrols on the border, like I say, principally in Texas and Arizona. These people are scary. They were armed, many of them with AK-47s and AR-15s. carrying signs like Atzlan question mark, hell no, right? I'm here to defend the border.
Mhm.
And although we don't have a very complete record of crimes down there, it's quite clear that migrants have been murdered
Mhm.
crossing the border, and not only by human smugglers and so on, or dying of thirst in the desert, and the many terrible things that
Right.
do happen. There have been assassinations on the border, and many of them we'll never know about. These people are out in the middle of nowhere in the desert someplace. Their bodies are found, years later, when they become skeletonized, and there's no evidence left. So I'm just
Right.
saying that while I certainly agree with you that kind of petty anti-Hispanic hate crime is very common, as hate crime is in general in this
Mhm.
country, there are also major attempts to, attack and kill. I mean, let's not forget El Paso, right? 23 people
Mhm.
dead, 22 people sent to the hospital, by a lone shooter, Patrick Crucius, who talks
Mhm.
about a Hispanic invasion.
Mhm.
And every time one of these mass shootings happens, there's another one of these manifestos that talk about the ideas that animated Crucius, right? The great replacement, again, what we kind of
Mhm.
referred to early, the white supremacist theory
Mhm.
that, Democrats and other liberal groups are orchestrating the replacement of white people in this country by others, by brown and black and, other people of color.
Correct. Yes, and also I remember last year the Uvalde shooting. That, in my opinion, I think that was the largest domestic terrorism towards Hispanic people probably in a long time. Even though the shooter was Hispanic, but all of the victims that were killed in that school, 19 children plus two teachers, were all Hispanic. And the thing that gets me is that the police had to get the border patrol to take him out. It's like, you know, what was wrong with the people there? It's like they couldn't subdue him.
Well, I mean, I'd say a couple of things. First of all, I don't regard Uvalde as an anti-Hispanic hate crime or terrorist act. I just don't
Mm.
think that's what the shootings were about, although you're certainly right that the vast majority of victims were Hispanic. Um, I mean, the other thing to say about that is I'm not sure what Uvalde really teaches us except some things about police. The police force, both the police force assigned to the school, the police force of Uvalde in general was majority Hispanic, as Uvalde was in general. And, it's undeniable that it was a complete and utter screw up, right? I mean, people died because the police failed to act. And that included, all groups that were there, the Department of Public Safety, that is the Highway Patrol of Texas, the Uvalde Police Department, units from the San Antonio Police Department, and so on. In any case, I'm not sure what Uvalde really teaches us about hate crime. It was an incredibly horrible attack, obviously, but just that, I
I
think El Paso is a better example, certainly,
right.
of
I think it
anti-Hispanic
taught.
hate crimes.
I think it taught about the easy access that people have to guns, especially
Sure.
in a state where it is easier to get an arm than it is to get a job, as they say. And just the fact that this individual was able to purchase that those weapons legally, and he had mental health issues, but it was not checked, and then he did what he did, and then all those children got affected by it. And it's a problem. Like, gun control in this country has become, it's not just a social issue, it's become a national security issue, and it's affecting everybody.
Well, I agree with that. I mean, it's a bit off our conversation about
Yeah, sure.
Hispanophobia or whatever you want to call it, but yes, I mean, there's no question in my mind. I mean, look, we are a country that has vastly more mass shootings than any other country, and the only way we're outliers in other ways is the fact that weapons, large weapons, serious semi-automatic weapons, are so readily available. So I
Mm.
don't think there's the slightest question. I mean, when Australia had a big mass shooting some 15, 20 years ago, they passed a law. They collected all the semi-automatic weapons in the country. They put them in a pile and burned them. And with one or two exceptions, they haven't had mass shootings since.
That is true.
Yeah. So, I mean, the answer is obvious.
So I want to ask you, as far as the Southern Poverty Law Center is concerned, like, what do you think can be done to address Hispanophobia? How can we deal with it? How can we educate the people on it? At the same time, how can we promote better understanding of the suffering of Hispanic people when it comes to Hispanophobia?
Well, let me say, first of all, that I don't speak for the Southern Poverty Law Center. I haven't worked there for 5 years, almost 6 years now.
Mm-hmm.
I was there for 20 years and led some of these efforts.
Mm-hmm.
I think certainly part of the effort that we've got to all make is aimed at children. The center had a department called Teaching Tolerance, which was all about going into elementary and middle schools and high schools and doing precisely what the title of the program suggested: teaching tolerance, helping people to understand one another, building bridges
Mm-hmm.
among different kinds of communities. My own self, I'm not, that has not been my sort of specialty at all. I've worked more at the kind of hard-edged edge of these things. And what I would like to see is many more of these politicians and other leaders who make these kinds of statements, which ultimately do lead to criminal hate violence, repudiated, to see them really shamed. I mean, I personally was on a campaign, probably lasted 6 years, to get Lou Dobbs thrown off the air, first off of CNN, and then ultimately off of Fox. And I went head to head with Dobbs. I used to go on, back in the day, I was with Southern Poverty Law Center. I used to go on these television shows.
I remember I used to watch you on TV back in the day.
Yeah, right. So, I mean, I had a kind of battle with Lou Dobbs over his claim that immigrants were responsible for a rash, an epidemic of leprosy in the country. He claimed that 30,000 cases of leprosy had appeared in the previous 3 years, and said there was, this was almost entirely due to immigrants. It was a complete and utter falsehood. As it turns out, the dummy had misread the statistics from the government. In fact, there were 7,000 cases over the course of 30 years, not 3 years, and not 30,000. And it went on and on. I mean, Dobbs, it turned out, was reporting on a miserable woman, a reporter for CNN by the name of Christine Romans, whose source for this claim was another woman, now dead, named Madeline Causman. Causman was a woman who claimed to be a big specialist in medicine, and so on. But in fact, Causman's only real qualification in life was she had once written a moderately successful medieval medieval cookbook. In any event, this woman, it turned out, we did some work on who is this Madeline Causman anyway? It turned out she'd been going around giving speeches to groups, and we actually had one of our reporters in one of her speeches in Arizona, in which this woman, Madeline Causman, said, and told her audience, and I quote correctly, "Most Latino men molest girls under 12, although some specialize in boys and others in nuns." I don't think it probably bears pointing out the absurdity of the idea of, Mexican men are flooding across the border from Mexico into the United States to find nuns. That seems a rather odd,
Yeah.
a country completely dominated by Catholicism to track down a few nuns somewhere in the United States in order to rape them. And anyway, I'm telling you the story just to point out,
right.
These things are fabricated out of thin air. But then you get a character like Lou Dobbs, who's, thinks it'll make great, he's just the Alex Jones of immigration, right? He thinks it'll make great copy. And an outfit like CNN, which, I don't have that many objections to CNN, but CNN refused for years to face the fact that Dobbs was lying on their air every day about the nefarious things that immigrants were up to in this country. Dobbs, for instance, promoted the idea that there was a secret plan d'Aztlan. And I will tell you that, an amusing moment in my sort of personal battle with Lou Dobbs, came when Dobbs one day illustrated the idea of Aztlan, right, the secret plan, by showing a map, a full-size map on the TV screen, showing the United States with about a third of it painted a different color. This was Aztlan. And then right across the whole map of the United States, and inch high letters, was source, Council of Conservative Citizens. Well, as I then went on the air to point out, the Council of Conservative Citizens is a white supremacist group that has written about how Black people are a, quote, retrograde species of humanity, compared Michael Jackson to an ape, and, on and on and on and on. Direct descendant of the old white citizens councils that fought segregation in the South. Right. So again, my point is just, you've got to look at where the propaganda starts. And then the food, as it makes its way up to the food chain, and the winds up on, the shows of Rush Limbaugh and Lou Dobbs and Tucker Carlson and
Michael
all
Savage.
The rest of that miserable gang. And I will say also that there's a lot of evidence, I've studied this for over 25 years, that what leaders, or people who are seen to be leaders, people who are on TV regularly, say has a absolutely powerful effect. There was something we dubbed the Trump effect after Trump took office.
I agree with you.
Immediately after he was elected, there was a wave of hate crimes in this country and other bias incidents. And, this comes from the feeling that people have that, oh, it's okay to say all Mexicans are rapists because the president is saying it.
Right.
Or because this guy, Lou Dobbs, who looks like a kindly old grandfather on TV, your favorite sort of amusing uncle, says it's true that they're secretly plotting to, rape our women and steal back our, our lands and so on. So I think that is, to me, you asked me how do we, obviously there are many ways. There's much bridge building that needs to be done in communities, much helping of, one another, and so on. I'm, as I say, sort of focused on the hard end of, who are the real villains in this, because there are villains, and there's a very large cast of them, and as has often been pointed out, people are not born hating other groups of people. These are learned behaviors. They're coming from somewhere, and it's pretty obvious where they're coming from.
Exactly. I wanted to tell you, Mark, thank you so much for being on the show. And I want to say you have done an excellent work in your time in the Southern Poverty Law Center. And for the listeners, if anyone's interested in reaching out to me or reaching out to Spanish United, we are in all the social media, Spanish United, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And as soon as I'm done with the interview, I'll send you the link, and you could, share it to wherever you want to share it to. Thank you so much for being on the show, Mark. It's a great honor.
A pleasure. Thank you.
Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.